Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Today, change. That always seems to be the order of the day, especially for many of us who approach midlife and find the way we've always been doing things just doesn't seem to be working. But how do we step into the new light, maybe stretch those boundaries a little bit and discover the possibilities that lie dormant within each of us? Today we're going to be talking about something known as higher brain living, and our guest today has been a licensed chiropractor for many years, but discovered this particular practice known as higher brain living and became one of its pioneers and one of the first to be trained and licensed in this practice. And in the successful practice, he demonstrated and saw immediately that he wanted that man had in his fingers and was discovering how people can actually see the miracles that he had begun to experience. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Dr. Drew Neville. Dr. Neville, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. Thank you, Daniel.
I'm just kind of knowing that I have to brace myself for those one-liners that I heard that you come up with every once in a while here while you're riding your Harley Davidson.
Yeah, I've been known to do that.
Now, first of all, what exactly is higher brain living? I know you get that question a lot, but I think a lot of people just are like, well, what's this all about?
Yeah, well, it is, obviously I get that question a lot because when people hear higher brain living, they get excited. And higher brain living is a gentle touch technique. It causes a surge of energy through the body and causes the higher brain to get more oxygen, metabolism, and blood flow, allowing a person to experience greater levels of joy, clarity, and even enlightenment states in connection. And that's really what it is. It's a personal growth and transformational system.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did you first come to discover this? What happened there? What was the meeting there?
It was a presentation put on by Dr. Michael Cotton in Milwaukee. I was a practicing chiropractor, and I was always on my feet to look for change and how I could develop myself better. And I saw a live demonstration of this process, and actually it was a very condensed session. But I saw a person laying on a table experiencing what he was telling me the higher brain was turning on and engaging, causing the body to have this very outward expression of a deep breath and movement that was spontaneous and involuntary. And it was something that I had been hearing about, but I had never witnessed. And so working with many, many people, in the upwards of thousands of people over the course of 10 years, it blew my mind. And so that was my first experience, is actually just seeing the live demonstration.
Now, what is the higher brain considered? Is there an area of the brain that's considered the higher brain?
Yeah, we call it the prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
That is really when we say higher brain, that's what we're referencing, is the prefrontal cortex.
Okay. Now, it was interesting because I did attend a short demonstration or seminar of this higher brain learning, and one of the things that really struck me was thinking of evolution, for instance, and that was one of the things that was talked about, and how in our evolution the brain kept evolving. New mechanisms kept coming into place that kind of stepped us up, but we're still mostly as humans living from that mammalian or reptilian area of our brain. You can see it all around us, our politics, the wars, everything else going on, and you realize, what are we wasting so much time in this petty sort of an existence when there's so much more to life? And I think people, tend to stay in that area there where they're always kind of in fear and a little bit of paranoia and never really striking out to achieve dreams. And I would think something like this helps people to really open up and become fearless. Is that usually what happens?
Exactly. To sum it up, our brain has evolved in layers over the course of millions of years, and the lower stress fear part of the brain is running the show nearly 95% of our life. And that stress response, definitely, it shows up in multiple different ways of just anxiety, not feeling purpose, not feeling passionate, and as you started the show, not changing, feeling stuck. Well, that's the lower brain's mechanism, is to do the same thing over and over. We coin it as same is equal safety. Well, that was good for adapting in a predator-rich environment to get back to your cave, so to speak, thinking saber-toothed tiger times. Well, that part of the brain, as you're saying, runs our show today, mostly because it's trying to still keep us alive from tigers, but tigers are now a delayed plane, our kid being sick, a performance review, and all of that is referenced from the exact same part of the brain millions of years ago if you're looking at evolution. And it's literally paralyzing our growth on an individual level, but as you were mentioning, even on a cultural level. And yeah, so it definitely gets you into that point of more joy and enlightenment.
So now it seems like we spend a lot of time really not developing or keeping our prefrontal cortex engaged. Is that kind of why we stay in that cloud or that shroud of fear, for instance?
Yeah, exactly. You got to we're looking at not being able to get time into the higher brain because the lower brain is unconscious. It does things without us thinking. It continues the same patterns. So yeah, we're not developing enough time there, and there's many things out there and modalities that are trying to attain this enlightenment or developing the higher brain state area. But yeah, that's really it. We're not developing it. We're not strengthening that muscle, so to speak.
Now, what kind of changes have you experienced, first of all, with yourself and then with people that you've worked with?
Yeah. Well, I'll have to take you back. Personally, for me, when I saw higher brain living, I was a practicing chiropractor, and I knew a lot about physiology, a lot about nutrition, a lot about personal growth. That's what I was doing, I thought, at a very quick pace. But personally, what I saw is I saw my practice nearly double in size. These are objective things. I went from seeing about 100 patients a week to 200. I gained 15 pounds of muscle in 2 months naturally, something that I was trying to do for years as a bodybuilder. I was actually working on getting a professional bodybuilding certificate. My relationship started to deepen, and to maybe stretch, or maybe this doesn't stretch the audience, is I found spirituality, or God, so to speak. I had a hard time with that word God for a long time, and working in this development system for years, going to life coaches, I would have that question of spirituality, and I would say, I really don't know what you mean. I would say I don't know if I have that. And that's what I personally saw, and it was quick. In a rapid, 6 months, my life had changed that much. I increased my income 33%.
Wow.
In a time that chiropractors were going out of business, and that was good for me, and that allowed me to start to actually educate myself more, which was actually becoming one of the first 5 people certified and licensed in higher brain living by Dr. Michael Cotton. And so within a year's time, I was quitting chiropractic, leaving a 6-year practice, and I was starting a higher brain living center. And readily within, and I'll say this because I was changing lives, I know I was, just because of the feedback, but Dr. Cotton had told me, he said, in 6 years of practice, you're going to see greater life changes, and he said it's not to put down what you've been doing, but greater life changes in the next 6 months than you've ever seen. And I just got a surge or a chill in my body right now, because it was true. Within 6 months, I literally had 7 women that were my clients come to me and say to me that they had been considering ending their life, and that now that they turned on to purpose and passion and the relationship with their friends and family and spouses became better. Their relationship to their job changed. Their body is morphed. I get that a lot with my clients is people, they'll say, I don't feel like I'm changing, but people always, they notice it. They see it in them. Mm-hmm. They see a light turn on even in their skin and in their eyes and in their face. So, and a multitude of different things have happened with the people that I've worked with. So,
you know, it just seems so fascinating because, again, as you were mentioning earlier, there is so much out there that seems to dangle a promise of a change in one's life. And people will spend thousands of dollars on weekend seminars for transformation, and they find themselves seemingly frustrated maybe 6 months or a year later. And it's not to say those things don't work, but for some reason they don't seem to work with the kind of, I guess, consistency you would think.
That's absolutely correct. And that was my personal frustration with the multitude of things that I was doing, you know, upwards of 130-some thousand to get a chiropractic degree, multiple nutrition degrees, personal growth degrees, and I was seeing exactly what you're saying. It was not sustainable. Well, come to find out, the reason a lot of things are not sustainable is because they are unable to shift the brain dominance of lower brain dominance to prefrontal cortex or higher brain dominance. And if they are, it's usually a very arduous practice and a lot of time and work on a daily basis. And what most people are unwilling to do, and I don't think it's because they don't want to, they think they want to, because they say they want to, is change. And because they can't consistently form habits. The reason that is anything that is not like a person wants it to be, whether it's a better relationship, more money, being more organized, being more healthy, if they want any of that and it's not the way they like it, it's because it's linked into the lower brain mechanism, which is doing the same thing over and over without us thinking about it. So we're readily hijacked by this lower brain response. Mm-hmm. And so that's why if people can get a shift of energy into their higher brain, well, I would say that those systems that people are looking into, they work exponentially. They actually do start working. And I can say that with confidence because I've seen it multiple times with people that are now going into their chiropractor or now going into their church or now going into their group, and they're starting to change.
That must be fascinating for somebody to finally realize change is happening, and then you can maybe get to a point to empower yourself to continue the process. In other words, to really be fearless about your desires and your goals and even your health as well.
Absolutely. You said it, realizing it to become empowered. And most people are not empowered, or if they are, it's very fleeting. It doesn't last very long. And so, yeah, being able to consciously see yourself being different, that's a big, big thing. You'll see that in all of the body work that people are doing, all the fitness centers, right? The mirrors and the pictures, and that helps people see a difference, the before and after. Well, that's a whole different thing when you're looking at something that is more subjective, like a relationship or your mind, and that the higher brain allows you to see the different level. It's a different awareness. It's not under the conscious threshold. It is the conscious threshold.
It's just so fascinating to consider this. Now, does this become a locked-in sort of a habit where you're out of the lower brain, so to speak, and more into the higher brain?
That's definitely what we see with anything. There's consistent application. But yes, that's what we see is when people start to get our sessions that we give them, they get more energy into their higher brain. The more often they do that, the dominance changes, so it becomes more of a higher brain dominance, which is you're not caught up in life. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's a daily practice.
Now, what would the daily practice actually be?
Well, a daily practice is somebody who's entered into a program which is 22 higher brain living sessions, which are 45 minutes long. There's about 20 to 25 minutes of a daily practice that we teach people on how to actually start to cue and now re-engage their higher brain when they're on their own, not as a trained facilitator. That's what we call the people that do what I do and about 250 other people, is touching in these specific pathways in the body turns the higher brain on. Well, when the higher brain starts to turn on and engage, it wants to do that. And so we actually teach people on how to re-engage this on a daily basis. And we also teach them how to look at their life from a higher brain perspective, look at all areas of their life from the higher brain so they can see where there's problems and they can see solutions, because the higher brain is the solution part of our brain. And when that happens, they can engage their higher brain at any given time, and then they can actually, we teach them how to create a resolution for each one of the areas of their life. Then they can state it when their higher brain is engaged. Well, when you start to do that on a daily basis, now the changes that you want to see are now anchored into the higher brain. Mm-hmm. That's how you start to change. As I said many times, well, I've already said a couple times, but I'll say many times, it's the lower brain likes the same things under the conscious threshold without thinking. It doesn't think about grabbing the donut. It just does it. And then next thing you know, you're 30 pounds overweight.
Now, has this worked pretty consistently with pretty much everyone?
That's a great question. And as I said, it's 22 sessions long. When people commit to that initial program and they do the daily practice, yes, I would say virtually 100% of the time it works. As with anything, especially when we're talking about our physiology or a person's biology, this is well known. If you don't use it, you lose it. Mm-hmm. If you don't use your bicep and work that bicep, it goes away. If you don't use your mind and you don't activate your mind on a daily basis, it goes away. But if you do, you can start to sustain these levels. And we've cued and keyed in a specific way in 22 sessions that starts to become a sustainable change for the people that do actually participate in this. So, yes.
It's fascinating when you lay out what you're talking about here for our listeners, is that we tend to really live through habits that we've created, thinking that is our in-the-moment experience. And to realize that we live that way because it shows a pattern of certainty. And as much as we feel inspired a lot of times by those who strike out and achieve, their goals and their dreams, even against odds that seem insurmountable, we realize as much as we want that, we go to step into that world, and of course we live in a world today with the idea of instant gratification. Everything is quick, everything is easy. But the fact is, everything that's worth doing, a habit takes time. If you were to, for instance, with cigarettes, I can't imagine anybody who first started smoking their first cigarette or their first pack of cigarettes that could definitively say they really enjoyed it. You have to really take that habit on and be committed to it before it becomes the habit that it becomes. And I always find it fascinating that people say they want change, but the fact is they're not usually willing to, as you said, commit to doing it, and therefore they fall short, and of course they start pointing their finger and blaming the tool rather than the tool wielder.
You're right on there, Daniel. I've worked with people long enough, and that's exactly right, is we don't want to do the work to get what we are asking for, and we live through other people, and that's never a good thing. And you said it just right, is forming a habit, especially unhealthy habits, usually isn't easy. We think it's easy, and we could go all over on how people market to that, but if we're just looking at the simple aspect, is we are not born as an individual wanting to be sick, disease-filled, not passionate, not connected. That's the exact opposite. We're born to be healthy. We're born to be connected. We're born to be abundant, yet we don't. Well, it's because of our brain does not want that. But when you start feeding the brain specific chemicals, and that chemical could be something you eat or smoke or drink, but it can also be the movement that you do or don't. Well, it's a reward system in that we rationally think about, which is usually irrational, saying, I'm just going to have one donut, I'll be fine, as opposed to saying, well, I'm just going to go to the gym for a half an hour. Well, that's kind of painful for them. So forming good habits it can be as difficult as forming bad habits. And research tells us now that it's all linked into what part of the brain we're in. And so if you want to be empowered, we know for a fact your higher brain has to be energized. That's not even an option. But most of us are not able to do that. We're using, research tells us, about 5% of its potential of our higher brain. We're all using it, but we're not using its full potential.
Mm-hmm. And how does that full potential actually look? Maybe we can't stretch that far, but if it's possible and you have experience with this, what does that look like?
Well, I've seen it and I've felt it. What it looks like is unapologetic purpose and connection. That's really it. There's full acceptance, love, and purpose and passion, and you can't stop me now. That's what it looks like. And how that looks like in each individual's life can be very different from somebody who's a higher brain living facilitator to somebody who's a mother, to somebody who's a scientist, to somebody who's a business consultant. But its purpose is really what it is. It looks like somebody who is on purpose.
I know it's fascinating because I understand there was a study that was done that measured the brain waves of Tibetan monks, and consider these people spend most of their lives, meditated in meditative states. People always wonder, how come these people always seem happy all the time? But that something like this higher brain living experience that people have been able to, after a few sessions, actually have the same or pretty close to the same brainwave measurements as Tibetan monks. Is that true?
It actually is true. When we're looking at that study that you're referring to, it was Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin, took his very, very top Tibetan monk meditators that had, and get this, talk about putting your nose to the grindstone, no less than 4 hours a day and no less than 20 years of meditation. Again, 4 hours a day, 20 years. Those are the individuals that Richard Davidson was measuring. The Dalai Lama handpicked these Tibetan monk meditators, and through our most recent research, we are actually measuring brain states in exactly what they're seeing in 20 to 30 years of 4 hours a day. We're seeing in a few months' time, 3, 4, 5 months. And the brain state, we can measure it now as exactly that, which is more purpose, more connection, more joy. And that looks like not being attached to all of your fears and anxieties. So they've taken time, and they've also made a culture out of it where that's who they hang out with.
Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating, Dr. Neville. I was going to point out that some time ago I had done a fascinating show segment with a lady who wrote a book called The Genesis Code.
Sure.
And she spent time pretty much looking into the book of Genesis out of the Bible and actually realizing that a lot of it was acronyms that you had to kind of break down to find out what the true meaning of what the book of Genesis is. And what she came to realize is that was a book that was created, of course this is in the Bible, that actually began to create what was known as mankind self-awareness, in other words, development of the prefrontal cortex. And so we started talking about the symbology a lot of people are familiar with, like the serpent, of course, that created this temptation to eat from the fruit of the tree, for instance. And the serpent, of course, being that reptilian mind, but if you want knowledge, you're now in a position because the Creator has given you that prefrontal cortex to move to the next level. And I found it really fascinating as she was really describing all of this and hearing what you're saying, and it's like, it's about time that we start getting away from just simply surviving and trying to thrive and to be what we want to be.
Well, that's exactly true. And interesting along those lines is the mechanism that the higher brain creates. We've coined it as the salutogenic mechanism, which we were talking Genesis, right? Genesis is the origin of. Salute is well-being. So the well-being is, so the mechanism of your well-being is your prefrontal cortex or your higher brain. So it's interesting. There's a very big parallel to that. Is it's actually, we are born to be, as I had mentioned before, purposeful, passionate, connected. That's all linked into higher brain energy, and most of us don't live our life from that point. And as Henry David Thoreau would say, most men and women lead a life of silent desperation, going to the grave with their song still in their soul. Mm-hmm. And that's big. That's big time, and that's why I do what I do. Just knowing that each individual out there has infinite capacity to be awesome, and that's not the case right now.
Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating to realize that at the turn of the century there was, and it goes back even further than this, that for instance, one of the classic works people like to talk about and quote, of course, is Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And I remember there was a time when I finally was aware of just how powerful the idea of thought was about how we become motivated, to do anything. For instance, you were mentioning the gym earlier. How easy it is when we decide all of a sudden we're inspired to go and work out and become fit and become healthy. And then after maybe about a week, of course, like most people, we go and we run and gun and we do as much as we possibly can and burn ourselves out. Then by the second week, maybe we might go to the gym, or maybe all of a sudden as you're about ready to rise and get ready to go to the gym, you realize, you really could use a little more sleep. So why don't we just go ahead and lay there? Besides, you really went at it hard last week, and before you know it, that old you is coming in and convincing you that although this was a great idea, why don't we just go back to the way things are?
Right. That is so true for most of us. And as higher brain would say, it's lower brain mechanism that does that. And not necessarily a bad way, it's just new to us. And why people fail, I feel, usually is three things. They don't have the right teacher, they don't have the right map, and they don't have the right compass. If anybody's ever wanted to get somewhere or do something, you need those three things. And a lot of us go to the gym or want to get more money, and we don't get the right coach or the right teacher. And even if we hire a teacher, does that teacher have the right map and the right compass? And those are all very important things. And if we look at brand new technology in cars nowadays versus 10 years ago, 20 years ago, think of a car right now. It's a vehicle, and it has the vehicle that it needs. It has maps in there. It has compasses in there. It has all the computers. We basically just have to get in, hit a button, and go. And we think about that now is that happened readily. But if people want to get somewhere, they need a teacher, they need a map, they need a compass, and then I guess the vehicle to get there. And the vehicle for people to change is the higher brain. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. And the whole system uploads your vehicle, gives you a nice map. And our facilitator is the teacher that helps people through these 22 steps or beyond if people want to. And that's how it really becomes helpful for these people that enter into higher brain living programs. And we also really encourage what we call meetup groups or culture, where people get together and talk about these experiences that they're having and these life changes that they're having, because let's face it, it's not all that ordinary and common for most people. So we like to encourage all of those things together.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were talking earlier about places that you touch on the body that cause, I guess, the reaction that it does for us to get into the higher state. How was this discovered? Is this sort of like a form of acupressure or acupuncture? What is it exactly?
Right, that's a good question. And so to really give context behind this is yes and no, and to explain that is Dr. Cotton had an experience 30-some years ago where he felt a change in him. And so he went on a change that changed the trajectory of his life from being in a factory to creating higher brain living. In the interim of that is he went on a relentless study of different systems that affected the body in different ways, in different pathways that have been known for thousands of years that create changes in your body or your brain or both. And which has to be both, because your brain really is the controlling mechanism, whether it's receiving or giving. And he started to find that our unique pathways for higher brain living consistently created this change in the body by touching it in a very specific way, a very specific sequence with the right amount of pressure and pattern. It caused the higher brain to turn on. And so there's some layover to many different energy systems, from chi or kundalini or many of them, even just subtle energy. And there's been many different ways of eliciting the response. What we've found is we've consistently caused the higher brain to engage. And so that's the difference, is we're specifically working with the body's energy system, and I should say latent, waiting to be turned on, is we turn on the switch for the higher brain. We're not putting anything into them. We just use the body to turn on their higher brain, which is waiting to be turned on. And when the higher brain turns on, it creates these mechanisms. And so our specific sequence causes the prefrontal cortex to turn on and causes the body to change in a specific way. Mm-hmm. And so that's really the uniqueness behind what we do, but not to take away that there's a lot of other things out there that have parts understanding of what we're doing, or even have an understanding, but aren't necessarily doing it in the specific, unique way.
Now, would you say that this actually brings people to a childlike state?
It can, absolutely. It can.
I just thought that would be important to bring up, because we remember as children, we would go out and play. If somebody, didn't play by the rules, you'd get upset for a brief moment in time, but then you were willing to go back and play with them again anyway. You'd set out and think, I'd like to go and get this for myself, and you just simply went and did it regardless of the disappointments until you got what you wanted. And somehow through conditioning as we got older, we seem to kind of repress back to the point where we allow those things that really blocked us to really be real, and we just weren't as motivated anymore. And I kind of wonder, for instance, like with addiction, have you seen people that actually have used higher brain learning to alleviate addiction? Do you find that people just see their addictions fall away, for instance?
Absolutely, on multiple levels, from addiction to bad food to addiction to bad relationships. There's multiple addictions out there, and for sure, people definitely just their higher brain doesn't crave those bad things. It craves different things, and now when you get into the higher brain state, yeah, there's definitely a joyful, childlike feeling. We have people that are going through sessions giggle often because it's just this overwhelming feeling of just detachment and not worried about everything, and not worried about what other people think, and not worried about what kind of car you have to get or what kind of health care plan is going on. It worries about just being in the moment, and that's key. And that's research tells us too, is being in the moment has to be higher brain state. Mm-hmm. The lower brain state is living in the past of what hurt them, or worried about what hurt them that might come out in the future. Mm-hmm. And children don't know that, just like you're saying, until they're taught those things, and they're conditioned into that, to saying, well, be careful, Timmy, you're going to fall. And now you're scared of heights because you fell and you got hurt, or whatever it is. Be careful that you're going to lose money if you invested in that stock or bond, and then you lose money, and then you don't do it again. In multiple different things out there.
Well, you take a look at a lot of our, I guess, messages that are out there, whether you get them from television, your iPhone, billboards, whatever the case is they're all intent on creating anxiety, so they have the solution to help you alleviate that. And you get to a point that you're sort of like that rat, you will, in a maze, and you're just following wherever you're going to feel better according to what somebody else tells you.
That's exactly right. And you're right. Marketers, they know how the people's brains work, from being rational to being irrational, and they feed on that and on the consumer. And the difference between that and what higher brain living does is we give people the tools to find out who it is that they are. Nobody can tell them who they are. They have to figure that out on their own. And that's kind of, if you're referring to Genesis, the book of Genesis, the same thing is it's about finding out who we are as an individual, not being concerned about everything else.
How about intuition? Have you seen intuition take leaps and bounds with people to where they're following that a lot more because it just becomes natural to do so?
Absolutely, to a point of in awe. I'm in awe at what their intuitions start to do. Mm-hmm. And I mean, things that I was basically a fundamental chiropractor. I wasn't into all sorts of different energy, and that's any of that anyway. And I've seen people become, I guess, what people would call psychic, just this inner knowing, being able to read into other people, being able to become more empathetic for others. And yeah, it's quite inspiring and awe-taking that what I have seen. It's really even hard to put into words until you see somebody change right in front of your eyes.
Mm-hmm. Have you had people, when something like this comes on the horizon and it's successful, there always seems to be naysayers that, tend to have credentials enough that whatever comes out of their mouth, we're just simply supposed to believe it because, well, they seem to know more than we do, that have actually looked at this and tried to debunk it as maybe some kind of crazy voodoo.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I think we're on both sides of it at this point. Personally, been doing this for 5 years, I have, I guess, less naysayers, but I don't think it's less. I just don't think I'm attached to it as much. I know it works now. I've seen it work so much that It's just I'm unwavering in it. But, yeah, every day people will see this and say, it's a couple things. They might say, well, there's no way that will work for me. Or they'll say, that's just weird hocus pocus. Well, once people see the demonstration and see a client experiencing this change right in front of their eyes, it can be very bizarre, and it's really hard to reference that. And, yeah, you go all the way to scientists that say there's no way that can happen, but they're stuck in old paradigms, would be what I would say. Because who would have thought that I'm actually going to be catching a flight here in about a half an hour. Who would have thought that we would be getting in a tube that has things that go out of the side that we fly 150 years ago? That would have been crazy, but yet we do it every day.
Well, I remember picking up a cookbook one time that was printed back in 1901, I believe it was. It says, and one day we'll even be cooking with electricity.
Yeah, and you're right. And think of the people that said, yeah, right. Well, here we are.
Yeah, now we have an iPhone or any kind of a cell phone where we can triangulate our position anywhere on planet Earth.
It's quite impressive. And that new technology definitely looks like magic or hocus pocus or voodoo. It just does. And science writer Arthur C. Clarke would say anything that's scientifically advanced is going to be indistinguishable, or any sufficiently advanced new technology is going to appear indistinguishable from magic or voodoo or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff. Higher brain learning, and our listeners out there can find a website where you go and you do classes and demonstrations, and they can find out what your schedule is and where you're going to be. What is that website they can find out more?
Yeah, it's actually spelled out higherbrainlivingevents.com/Portland/. I'm actually going to be in Portland for a live demonstration on Monday.
We're talking Portland, Oregon.
Yep,
Okay.
Portland, Oregon. But if you go on to typed out Higher Brain Living, not learning, living with an LIVING, even if you just go to higherbrainliving.com, you'll get to our general website and you can peruse that and learn more. But yes, on Monday, I'll actually be in Portland doing a presentation at the Embassy Suites, Portland downtown at 6:30 to 8:30. If you register, it's free to attend, and that's at 6:30 on Monday.
Well, very good. I know that we put out a weekly e-newsletter, which I encourage our listeners to subscribe, where they can find out more about all that as well, simply by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. And I would like to thank you for taking the time to come on the program today to share this with our listeners. Very encouraging stuff, it sounds like, for people to make those changes that they really desire to have in their lives. And we're talking lasting change.
Absolutely, Daniel. It's my pleasure, too. I really love doing these types of interviews. So thank you for reaching out, and thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Higher Brain Learning. Find out about it. Find out, participate, and become that person you always believed you were meant to be. You can find out also more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. We'll get a link up there for you as well, so that way you can find out more. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.